You spot meter your exposures, or what do you do?
Yes and no.
That's an extremely long exposure, 3 to 5 minutes.
It is. Well, some people take,
Well, I
10,
know.
20, 30-minute exposures.
That's
So
pretty long.
most of my shooting now for landscape work like this is being shot digitally. For two reasons. One, I no longer put my 4x5 camera into my kayak because it's stupid. It's so cumbersome and so much gear to carry that I was missing photographs because of it. And I became quite frustrated. And I also admit I had this sort of anti-digital feeling for a while because I'm a snob. I like shooting large format. But I suddenly realized, you know what? It doesn't really make that much difference. I mean, what's going to allow me to capture what I'm trying to do? So I started taking I shoot with, right now I've got a Canon 5D Mark II. So it's got a nice big file size. And I can carry it in the boat, camera and 2 lenses really is usually all I ever have. But I've got a waterproof case for it, and that fits in there reasonably well. Tripod goes in a waterproof bag on the back deck of my kayak. And, you know, I'm mostly happy with the results I get. And for shooting at that time of day, the digital camera is nice because I'm not going to lie to anybody. I don't even need her anymore. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh yeah, I'm spot reading everything. I mean, I look at the camera meter and I get an idea of what the exposure is. But if I want a long exposure to smooth out the water, well, I'm taking a bit of a guess, and then I'll take a shot digitally at a short version of that shutter speed to see if I got the exposure close, and then I stop the lens way down to f22 or whatever and put it on bulb and let it go, and then I'm looking at the screen and the histogram. I look at the histogram all the time. So call it chinging if you want, but that's what I do. And the reality is, I mean, it's quite accurate too. I find it a good way to work. So shooting at that time of day has sort of become what I really like now. And I mean, this shot's a bit of an exception. It's not taken. That's not a long exposure. This was taken on a mostly sunny day. But this particular spot is a place that I love. It's a spectacular location there. This is the Brooks Peninsula on the northwest coast of the island. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's boat accessible only. An extremely rugged place. Summertime, it's a nice, pleasant place. Last 2 days, no, not last night. The wind we had last night was worse the night before on the west coast. The wind was gusting over 70 knots at the tip of the Brooks Peninsula. I mean, it's an extremely stormy place in bad weather. And I love it there. It's my favorite place on the planet, to be blunt. I mean, it's incredibly beautiful. So I've roamed around there taking all kinds of photographs, and I love this shot because we had a blue sky, but west is out this direction, at the tip of the Brooks is way down there, and off the end of the Brooks Peninsula was this line of cloud, and it generates its own weather systems there, localized weather, and there are this cloud, my friend called it the cloud train, was coming off the tip of the Brooks with these beautiful little wispy clouds coming out. So, you know, again, that's shot in a digital camera. It shoots in color, and I convert everything to black and white. And I don't do crazy manipulations to my images. I mean, I do what I used to do in the darkroom. So I did some burning and dodging. I darkened the sky a little bit, achieved the contrast that I wanted in this area because I was really amazed by there's all these dead trees in this location with these stark white trunks. And I liked how they jumped out from the rest of the trees in behind. So I want to make sure I, have that contrast looking the way I want it.
You don't use Silver FX Pro or anything?
So you say that when you shoot digital, you shoot in color?
My camera only shoots color. I can't shoot monochromatic, so I shoot in color and I convert it afterwards. But the amazing thing is that because I've been shooting black and white for so long, I mean, I see in black and white now. It doesn't. Some people I know have made the comment, "Oh, I hate shooting in color because that's what I see." Well, I don't know. It doesn't bother me because in my mind I'm seeing the shot like that. So.
Is there any particular dodge and burn technique you use that's better than others that you've come across? Because you've got a nice way of doing it here.
Yeah,
and
to be perfectly honest with you, I'm a Photoshop hack. Yeah. I should be taking your course. Because I mean, my methods for burning and dodging are rudimentary. I mean, I don't use layers or masks and stuff, which I should be doing. You know, I'm selecting an area. Because I still think in terms of the darkroom there, I'm making shapes with my hands and stuff, and pieces of cardboard with holes cut in them. So that's what I started replicating. I mean, I would select an area, feather it, and so forth. works for me, and I'm trying to fine-tune my techniques, but that's essentially what I do. You know, and I adjust the contrast and so forth.
And all these have been done by that process you said. These are platinum outputs?
These are
They platinum, sorry? Or?
these are all platinum prints.
Okay, so you output them to that digital negative, like you said?
Yeah.
And all of them have been done that way?
Yeah, yeah, and I'll talk a bit about the whole technical process in a minute. So, so this shot is sort of, it isn't that long exposure technique that I've used a lot of now, but again, for here, I mean, it works. I mean, that was such a dramatic spot at that time. That's the same location as these two photographs here, this one and this one. And these shots were taken at dusk, you know, exposure is probably about 30 seconds. The seascape wasn't overly crazy, but there was, you know, there was breaking waves coming in and so forth, but they're smoothed out nicely. This is the last remnants of that cloud that was coming off the end of the Brooks Peninsula. And I really like when there's some motion to the clouds, so a lot of my shots have that. I mean, all these do, that one does, that does. I almost more so, I think, than the whole idea of having the water smoothed out with these really long exposures that you tend to see nowadays. I really like seeing movement in the clouds. And again, it's like we live here, and I live 3 blocks from Dallas Road, and I never get sick of going and looking down at the ocean there. It's different every day. You know, different time of day, different tide, different wind direction. You know, and you sit there and you look and you watch the clouds and they're kind of moving across the horizon. And I love that. So trying to capture that, seeing how the motion of those clouds moving across the landscape, again, it makes me happy when I see that. So that's what I like to include that in my photographs. This shot here was taken on Chatham Island. I know people are familiar with Chatham Island. Chatham Discovery, just off of Oak Bay here. Chatham Island has the radio towers on the end of it. And I shouldn't be saying this, but Chatham Island is one of my favorite places. After the Brooks Peninsula, probably my favorite place in the world. It's incredibly beautiful. It's full. It's mostly Songhees Indian Reserve land, so there's nothing on it besides the radio towers. It's mostly Gary Oak and arbutus trees. It's an amazing ecosystem. It's a fantastic place, and I paddle out there in my kayak, you know, for day paddles. I've been there easily over 100 times, and I never get sick of it. You know, if I've got a day where I can get out in my boat just for an afternoon or something, that's my destination of choice. Just because it's a fantastic place, you know, just it's beautiful. You see a variety of marine life out there. You know, this summer there was that gray whale out in Oak Bay Marina, which I, you know, had about 6 meters away from me at one point. So it's an amazing place, and I'm sitting out here, and this one night when I went out there, there's a group of Gary Oak trees at the end of the island there that I've always wanted to capture, and they're surprisingly difficult to photograph. I mean, trying to take pictures of trees like this that have light coming through them, you can see the sky in behind. I mean, it's really difficult, and I've only barely begun to scratch the surface. I mean, it's an ongoing thing for me to try and find a way to photograph these trees in an effective way. Arbutus trees are the other ones. I still don't have a good shot of an arbutus yet. And Chatham Island is the place where I keep going. And I found the grove that I like now, and I'm trying to figure out how to shoot them at this point. But this shot here, you know, I was sitting there, these clouds were moving across the sky. This was a longer exposure, at least that was about 5 minutes or so, because there's very slight star trails in it. You know, in some ways, I wouldn't take them out because I don't believe in doing that, but they're almost so short, they look like little specks in some ways. But I just love the movement in the clouds. So it's that sort of movement within these images that I'm intrigued with now. And this is sort of what I've been doing the last few years. And what I'm going to continue working on this because I'm inspired by that. This shot here, again, taken from Chatham Island. The water's all smoothed out by about a 30-second exposure, and the clouds have a slight bit of motion in them, which just, it appeals to me. That's that time of day I love. So, whenever I photograph, you know, anything now, even if there's not water in the shot, I'm always thinking about clouds. I want clouds. You know, can they be clouds that are moving in there somehow? And like I said, I don't really shoot in the daytime much anymore. I mean, occasionally, in a cloudy day as well. I mean, the shot taken in the Kennedy River down here, you know, I stumbled across this location in the wintertime when there's no leaves on the aspens. I think they're aspen. And I was just struck by how they, the contrast that they had. So, and this is what I tried today, and this was still a fairly long exposure. It was a dark day, cloudy. It was, as I recall, it was about a 2 to 5 second exposure. So, I mean, you can't really see any movement in the water in the river. It was very shallow there. But the air was nice and still, so there was no movement in the branches or anything. And, but I just, so for me, shooting in sunshine just doesn't really work for me anymore. There's a photographer named John Sexton. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him. He's an American. He shoots landscapes, very well known with shooting in Yosemite area, the Sierra Mountains, that sort of area. And he was a huge influence on me. I stumbled across his work maybe 15 years ago now, and I have most of the books that he's done. And he was known for this sort of literal interpretation of the landscape. But this very much reminds me of the type of work he would do. But his first book that I bought was called Quiet Light. And he introduced me to this idea of shooting at dusk, because that's the only time he photographs. He doesn't like high contrast. So, and I started playing with that sort of idea, and I realized, okay, I can see why. From a technical perspective, it's nice too, because shooting in low contrast is great. I don't have to worry about blowing out highlights and keeping shadow detail. I take the photograph that has lots of information in it, whether it's film or digital, and then when I process the film, I can adjust the contrast at that point. Or when I process my digital file, I can make sure that I've got all the information in there that I need. And generally now, because I'm working with digital negatives, my ultimate file to work with is a nice low contrast file. I don't want a lot of extremes in there, because then I can do my burning and dodging in Photoshop. Quite frankly, nicer than I ever did in the darkroom, because I can be more precise with it. Even if I am a hack at it, I can. Working that way is much better than firing around pieces of cardboard and stuff and trying to use different grades of paper and so forth. So that's been the sort of change I've seen in my own approach to photographing the landscape. And ultimately it has been tied to my own experiences from the time I've spent around here on the coast. This shot at the end here was taken on Clark Island in the Broken Group Islands. And it's just that tree, when I saw it, it's just sort of, there's a little meadow where you can camp, and it's sort of just tucked in behind. And I saw the tree and I looked at it, and it's just like, I knew I had to photograph it somehow. And that's actually, the shot is not a square. The shot is taken, the shot is a rectangle. And it was funny, it was Diana's suggestion to crop it square, and it was only when I did that that it actually worked even better than what I had originally envisioned. So, again, it's just a place that I'd seen several times now, spent time sitting and looking at this stupid tree, trying to figure out what do I do with it. And even the way I thought I had it wasn't quite right. It took another set of eyes to say, why don't you try this? And the square crop works very nicely, I think. So, I often tell myself never to be happy with my composition. So, if I take a shot of something, I always try and figure out how else can I take it. I mean, there's times when I take a photograph and it's like, oh, I've just got a really nice shot, I'm really happy with that. But then it's just like, don't be happy with it. Try and figure out what else I can do with it. Maybe from a different angle, different composition. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Did you ever layer multiple exposures to get the shadow detail?
Not in this sense. No, I do. I photograph architecture commercially, and I do a lot of blending and exposures when I'm shooting interiors, but I've never done it for this sort of thing. I mean, my goal with these photographs is not to alter things, and I don't like, I'm not going to create anything that wasn't really there. And again, because I'm shooting in generally lower contrast, it's not necessary. I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk a bit about then was my approach to photographing the nude in the landscape has gone through a similar, I want to say transformation, I guess. And that initially when I started photographing the nude, because of how much I love the West Coast landscape, it just seemed a logical fit to put the figure into that landscape. And once I started doing that, I was pleased with the results. But I admit, I looked at the photographs and I liked them, but there was something not quite necessarily made them stand apart from other photographs I'd seen, I guess, and wasn't quite achieving what I wanted.